Hi, I'm David No from Film Journal, and I'm going to bring out the director of this wonderful movie, Marc Webb.
Hello.
How good was this? How smart was this? How funny was this? Yeah.
Oh, stop.
No.
Okay.
Drop in the fucking summer desert, right?
Yeah.
Although it has been a good summer. So the script, right? It starts with the script.
Yeah, this was a script that had been kicking around Hollywood for many, many years. Alan wrote it when he had spent, I think, 7 or 8 years. He's from Chicago originally. Spent 7 or 8 years in Hollywood, just having a terrible time. His car broke down. He's like, I can't do this anymore. He sold his car and with the money moved to Tribeca for the summer and said, I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to try to write a screenplay one more time. And he wrote the script and then brought it back to Hollywood, and it got bought shortly thereafter. And then he wrote Things We Lost in the Fire, which got made. And that sort of launched his career. And this had been kicking around for a while. And I had read it before I did 500 Days of Summer. And I thought there was something really interesting about it. It is different. It's from a different era, but it always stuck with me. And I tried to get the job. They laughed me out of the room at the time. And then a few years later, when I was doing the Spider-Man movies, I was like, I like that script. I like that relationship between WF and Thomas. I'd be really curious to see what happened to it. And they sent it to me again, or I got my agents to send it to me. And it had been, the title was Only Living Boy. The New York had been taken out and was set in Chicago. And like the guy worked at an advertising agency. And I was like, I felt so gross. I was like, what happened to this thing? So I went back into my email and found the original draft. And I was like, listen, if you can wait for a few years, I'd love to make this. And I felt a real loyalty and obligation to Alan. It was something very special to him. I think it was the first thing that kind of that he did. And
2004.
Was that what?
That's what
13
I read.
years ago. Wow.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's where that's the story of the script being written. And then,
and it's low budget, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
it's a little movie, which was really fun for me. Like, when you're doing that, it's either a disaster with people because people are so at each other's throats because you have limited resources. But there's a real esprit de corps. Like we had Kate and Jeff and Callum and Pierce. Everybody was there for the movie, and we had a really, really good time making it. I live down the street from here, and I would walk to the set on the Lower East Side. I probably bothered many of you. Who I'm sure live in the neighborhood while we were shooting, but it was great. It was a great shooting experience.
The cast, this assemblage.
Yeah, there's like that. The 11th commandment should be, "Thou shalt make a movie with Jeff Bridges."
Is that what happens?
Because it's as cool as you would imagine it to be.
Really?
Yeah.
He's like one of the greats to me. It's just like, when does he ever disappoint? And like from Last American Hero, like when he started,
or Fearless, there's a humanity and a depth to him. There's a dignity there, but there's also a real compassion, and he is that way as a human. There's no anger in him. Like he will assert himself, but there's a gentleness that I think audiences feel, you can't help but to feel in his performances.
Mm-hmm. He was like the only guy that you thought of for it?
I wouldn't have made the movie with anybody else.
Yeah.
So
it started with him, and then everyone else came on board.
Definitely. And then Kate and Pierce, and then Cynthia came in a little bit later. And Callum, we just auditioned a bunch of kids, and Kiersey was the same thing.
Wow. Kate obsesses me. Because after like Love and Friends, I can never remember.
Love and Friendship, yeah.
Love and Friendship, right.
Clearly made an impression on you.
And this is like kind of almost an extension, like a modern day of that character, which I love. Yeah.
Well, she's an incredibly acerbic, like a world-class British wit. It's very easy to think of her as like the woman from Wonderworld, but if she went to Oxford, you forget, like, I remember her from Much Ado About Nothing, which I saw when I was in college. And I was like, who is that? It was just such sweetness. And but she is, if you spend much time with her, she's like, she will make the sailors blush, as they say. Like, she's dynamite. Don't get in her way. That's all I'm saying. Like, she'll dismantle you with her, with any one of her many
And you were
tools in
talking
our
about
arsenal.
that scene finally with her and Jeff. And
Yeah, I
that
remember it was shooting.
like
It was the last. It was them on the rooftop where he's kind of like threatening her in a way, and he's a little bit drunk. And I remember shooting that. It was the last scene that we were shooting with Jeff, and I was like, "Oh, that's what movie stars are." There really is a dimension and a depth to certain performers that's pretty magnificent. And I think Kate and Jeff have it, in spades. And I wish there were more scenes with them together. They're really, really fantastic, great humans, and wonderful, wonderful actors.
Yeah, and Brosnan, who like I always frankly thought was kind of like a Barney's mannequin come to life or something. In this, he's phenomenal.
Yeah,
And
he's
like
great. Also, you get to see him rage a little bit, and he was. You don't think of him in that way, but he can play that quite well. And there's some sophistication. There was actually a scene that we cut for it wasn't totally necessary for the story, but he's a very nuanced actor, very thoughtful, great, highly trained, deeply thoughtful, measured at times. There's so much to him. I think, I don't know how much he wants to work anymore, but he's quite brilliant.
Yeah, I think this is the crown of his
Also,
career.
he has a charisma, and he's got a intelligence and a sophistication. It's tricky to find that combination. And this role was it's not like it's tricky to get someone to find someone to. He was the top of the list, and I'm glad he said he was playing like an infertile guy, and there's a lot of vulnerability there, and he totally embraced it without batting an eye. I was very, very lucky to get him.
And Nixon, like how'd she come on board?
She was just phenomenal, and just jumped into that. She's also lives down the street from me, so I would see her, and I wouldn't stalk her. Don't stalk her. Don't do anything crazy. But incredible sophistication, and just jumped right into it. We had such a great time. It was a really warm experience.
How long was the shoot?
28 days. We had about 10 days of rehearsal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, beforehand. We got to rehearse on locations, so we went to the apartment and spent time and got a sense of the space, and it was helpful to be able to figure out how to shoot it in that situation, and you get a sense of the props. It was a fun way to do a movie.
And the dinner party scene. That was quite a guest list too.
Well,
is this a Woody Allen movie?
All
or
I
what?
wanted was Wallace Shawn. I just wanted to
Really?
hang out with Wallace Shawn, and then once Wally did it, I can call him Wally now. I hung out with him for 4 hours. It was the best 4 hours of my life. No, he's a really, really cool guy. But then Tate and Debbie came on, and Adam Siegel is a friend of mine. He produced Drive. He came out and did a little bit there. You can see his face, but it was the dinner party you were promised before you moved to New York. This whole movie was, it is a fable, and it's and I think about it that way, and I it's not a realistic depiction of New York, and it wasn't an effort at that, and I don't think you can explain movies. Movies have to live on their own, but that's how I thought about it, and. It was the idea was a New York that I imagined New York to be before I ever moved to New York. That was the clue. That was the romantic. That gave it sort of the romantic palette. That was the log line for the art departments and for the cinematographer.
Yeah, and you touch on New York itself, which is like a love letter to New York as well.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
The Barbados reference. We were just talking about that.
Right. Yeah, it's true. CBGB's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're from the Midwest, or
I'm from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I think again informs my fantastic. I live here now. I've lived here for a while, but I had a romantic idea. Subways passing movie theaters is exactly what I thought about. But I did have a romantic idea of what New York was. The stimulation, the culture, the intellectual, the snobbiness, the importance, the thoughtfulness, the complexity, all those things I fantasized about when I was, before I came here. And I tried to get in touch with that.
Are you self-taught pretty much as a filmmaker? Because you didn't go to school, right?
No, I studied English in college. I went to school in Colorado, and then I went to NYU for a semester. I was saying, I watched Clerks in 1995 in the theater down the hall here, but that was the extent of my training. And then I edited, and then I did music videos for about 8 or 9 years, before I made 500 Days of Summer. So
Yeah, how did you drop into like music video making?
well, I didn't have MTV when I was growing up, which made me want to watch it all the time once I could, and I worked for a documentary filmmaker named Doug Prey, who just did executive produced The Defiant Ones, which if you haven't seen, you should watch it. It is incredible. Albert Hughes directed it, and he edited it, and he taught me how to edit, and he had done some music videos, and I was like, that sounds like a cool thing to do. And then I did some very small ones, kind of off the cuff, and then gradually over time did bigger and bigger ones, and it took a few years, but that was the beginning of that part of my career.
I mean, you've had like one of the wildest trajectories of any like film director, I think. Like 400 Days your first movie?
500 was my first movie, then Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 were the next ones. I made the movies in the wrong order. Like, I think I should have made this movie first, then 500, then Gifted, then Spider-Man, then Spider-Man 2. Maybe I should have made Spider-Man 2 first. That would have been interesting. But, yeah, who knows? Yeah, it's been a little bit crazy, a little bit wild.
Yeah.
But fun, really fun.
Yeah. What's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, I've been doing some TV stuff, which I think that what's happening in television is really interesting. There are some film projects that I'm working on, but they're a little bit bigger and take a much longer time. I want to be very careful about bigger movies now. I'm not as like desperate to like play in that field nowadays. Like I want to do something. I want to be careful about it. I want to be thoughtful about it, and that takes a lot of time to persuade studios to do that. I think there's a limited bandwidth in terms of what they can release and how much money they can invest, and so I want to be very careful about that in the future. But there is some TV stuff. I mean, I'm still an executive producer on the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which I still work on from time to time, and a few other shows. But I don't know. Anybody got any ideas? Just kidding.
And you've chosen to live here, right? Which is like
most of
a
the time.
definite choice.
Yeah.
You Woody Allen? Who do you think you are?
No, God, no. No.
You spent time in LA, obviously, right? So
Yeah, I lived in LA for
what was that
about
like
10 or 12 years. It was great. Well, I did a lot of music videos there. That was the center of the business. Now, like, I think the way tax incentives are and just like the kind of work I want, like there's a lot more work here. So it's easier to live in New York City. But do you want to do questions? Should we do questions, or?
Shall we?
Yes, I recognize you.
First of all, great film.
Thank you.
I truly enjoyed it. My question to you is, as a director, when you get a screenplay, what liberties can you take, do you feel you can take on making it your own? And how do you go with if you want to change something or have your own idea?
Well, it depends. It depends on the project. I think, like in TV, I view myself as someone to help the writer. I feel most of the time like I'm there to like partner with them. But on a movie, it's about the movie, and I've always developed everything. I don't feel it's not like a play where you have to be crisp with every word. The movies have a visual component that has to I feel like has to dominate the production, and a lot of times you can tell the story without the words. And that's not to say the writers don't create those images. Sometimes they do, but it's I would say it's a much more collaborative process. I try to work with just one writer. On bigger movies, it tends not to work out as well. But on this movie, it was, Alan wrote everything. We worked for a couple years, like while we were working on other projects, like, oh, let's try this scene, let's try this structural thing, and like we changed a lot of stuff. And then there was a couple like the speech in the wedding speech was written by a guy named Alvin Sargent, who was is a great historic screenwriter who wrote Ordinary People, Paper Moon. He'd won 2 Academy Awards. He'd done a little writing on Spider-Man. His wife, who has since passed, was the producer on Spider-Man. I met him through that, and Alan and I were trying to like figure out. Like I wanted a statement of the themes of the movie in a kind of oblique way, and I thought that that was an interesting opportunity to do it, but we couldn't ever get it right. And I asked Al, I called up Alvin, and he was like, I don't know, I can't, no, I don't like, I'm a hack, I can't do this anymore. Like, click. And then a couple days later, he read the script, and he said at 5 o'clock in the morning, I remember it very specifically, he sent me this toast. And I was very moved by it, partly because I love Alvin, but partly I think he's saying, like, the drama of it, you think this guy's going to ruin the wedding, and he ends up saying something kind of interesting and beautiful and compassionate, and it's a gentle kind of writing that I think Alvin is just sublime at. And I sometimes I have that on my phone, and I read it from time to time because it feels like poetry, you know? And
Beautifully done by Bill Camp.
yeah,
right?
Bill Camp, who
How did he come aboard?
well, I had seen him in The Crucible and also in Death of a Salesman with Andrew Garfield, who played Spider-Man, and I had known him from his theater work and from The Night Of on HBO, which if you guys haven't seen, you should definitely see it. And I was like, that's the guy. And I called him up, and I was like, here's the story about this. It's Alvin's writing. I would love you to do it. And he was like, sure. And did it and came in for a day. It was so much fun. We had such a good time doing it. He's a brilliant actor. He has that great voice. But that's the kind of thing, like you're constantly messing around and with the screenwriters, and it just depends on the screenplay or the situation, frankly.
Like, was that one take that he did, or how? Like,
No, we did about 4 takes, but it was a very long day of shooting because we had a lot of coverage in the wedding to do. So we're like, he kind of got, we just had to rush through it. But he's such a pro, and his wife Elizabeth Marvel was in my last movie, Gifted, played the principal. So it was kind of crazy.
Anything else?
I noticed there are lots of nods to The Graduate in this movie and in 500 Days of Summer. Could you talk a little bit about what The Graduate means to you?
Yeah, I wrote the liner notes to like one of the Blu-rays of the Graduate, because after I did 500, in which we show a clip of The Graduate, like Mike Nichols called and was like, hey, I like the movie. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, I was like, and I felt, so I was like, and we had a lunch, and I was just obsessed with it. But I would tell you, like, one of the things about that movie is it was my dad's favorite movie. And my dad's not like a big cinemaphile. Like he's works in the university in Wisconsin. But he was so connected to that movie. He felt so deeply for it. And he would always, after we watched movies, we would rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And he always rated movies much lower than I did. Like when you're a kid, your favorite movie is the last movie that you saw. And he was like, well, what? I was like, did you ever get a 10? Like, don't you have any enthusiasm for life at all? And he's like, there's one movie, The Graduate. And I remember getting a VHS copy. I bought him a copy of it because all I wanted to do when I was growing up was watch movies, and any excuse I could have to convince them to get a VCR, buy tapes, I would do. And that I watched that very early on, and it was a very provocative movie. It made me feel strange, It made me feel different than Indiana Jones, or it had this kind of melancholic tone, and there was an irony that I didn't quite understand the first time I saw it, and my feeling for it developed over time. And I think so that movie has become, it's one of the movies that it's very easy for me still. I watch it frequently, and you see something new every time, but I do think that the language of that film is so sophisticated and so developed it was like, one of his first movies. It just displays a profound talent, and it can't help, and maybe I lean on it too much, but it is infected my brain permanently. And I think Alan loved The Graduate too, and I think it was just like, I was scared because 500 had that, that homage to The Graduate, and this had that Graduate. I was like, I can't ever do a Graduate thing again, but I couldn't resist. What can I say?
Voice soul.
Yeah.
And Paul Simon, right? I mean, again, the connection, right?
There you go.
Like
Exactly.
with the music for this, which was good. I mean, yeah. Well, what were your ideas behind that?
Well, I still don't know if I made the right decision, but like I was the very last minute I put the Simon and Garfunkel and Only Living Boy song in there because I just thought like everybody's gonna be so pissed if it's such a great song, but I didn't. I was like, is it too on the nose? I don't know, but I ended up putting it in because it's like fuck it, great song. But yeah, I wanted music that had a New York flair, like. Not necessarily from New York, but just felt like New York to me, which had a little bit of jazz. There's a lot of Mingus. There's some, Blues Run the Game, which Simon and Garfunkel covered, and then Paloma Azul was the Brubeck song. It's kind of that lilting jazz piece, and then Rob Simonson did the score. I love the score. It's the tone of this movie is weird. Like it's like a soap opera. It's like playful and we kind of went for it in terms of like making it a little sarcastic, I think. And that wedding toast was interesting. Like I temped it with Yumeji's theme from In the Mood for Love, which is a beautiful, it's a waltz. It's a 3/4 time, really, really beautiful, haunting song. And we kept on, so when we tried to score that, I kept on trying to do a 3/4 time piece, and Rob, the composer, and I were just like, it doesn't quite work. So he like changed it into tango, and that it just gave it a sexier component, which made that, I think, really fun.
We didn't really talk about Callum. How many actors did you see for that?
Yeah, a couple hundred, and he was like, "Yeah, I think you needed like that place where that actor that fit, like that could be put on his heels by someone like Mimi, but also you had a nascent masculinity that made them what you kind of want. I'm curious to see what happens with it when he gets with Johanna. You wanted that sort of supple, very narrow time in a young man's life where that both those things could possibly go down." And he had that, and he sort of liked to bite off the dialogue, and it was fun. I think his that kind of neurotic charm that they were after.
I recently watched Godfather 2, and the movie is very famous for the fact that Robert De Niro and Al Pacino don't share a single scene.
Yeah.
Now in this movie, it was quite possible, at least at the end, to have Pierce Brosnan and Jeff Bridges to share a scene.
Sequel.
A sequel, yeah.
That's not going to happen.
Was there any idea about them sharing a scene?
What a great question.
Thank you.
And because it was a discussion that we had. Like, and the thing is, I wanted, and like they have such a history, but the story was told it was restricted to Thomas's point of view, and we diverged from that from time to time, but we tried to keep it as specific to him, and it like once Thomas finished his journey and realizes who his father is, his journey is done. And to tolerate a meaningful scene between Pierce and Jeff, we actually tried versions of that, like in the writing process, and it never quite felt right. We put him like we even shot a scene like in the party where he sees him across the room, but then it like tipped its hand too much. It felt like kind of weird, and it just never felt right. But it's a great question because it's something that we, in Heat, they have that one scene and a couple scenes together, but it's like, but keeping them separate was interesting. Ultimately, it was Thomas's story, and it's tricky because Thomas is not, Callum's not as a well-known an actor, so there is a kind of a natural weight or desire in an audience to see these two big stars together. But it just didn't work out that way. It just didn't feel appropriate for the film. But it's something that we discussed. It would be fun to see that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Since you were saying it was like a fable of New York and like an outsider view, what were challenges or surprises now that you're in New York or trying to still capture that feel?
I think it. The trick of it was the timeless part of it. Like we talked about, do we include social media? Do we plant a flag in a certain thing? But that gets dated really quickly. The script was also written a long time ago, which is no excuse. But we tried to avoid lots of cell phones and like technology, and the situations were heightened enough that like it's not like a Tim Burton movie or anything like that, but it was. I didn't want I didn't want it to feel super gritty, you know what I mean, or raw. And part of that, the way we addressed that was, was just aesthetic choices, like, really restricting the color palette. There's very few primary colors. The buildings are, a lot. There's a lot of neutrals. There's a lot of like blacks and grays and khakis. And then the other thing was trying to, like my last movie, Gifted, these very simple movies. So I wanted to kind of be free of the whole, like the Spider-Man apparatus. And Gifted, it was all like handheld and gritty to kind of cut against the sentimental component of the movie. And this, like, everything was very precise. We did a lot of overhead shots to create a sense of a more mystical environment. And again, it was just an attempt to create a world that felt a little bit elevated, and that and part of that was, it was more about omitting things than it was including things. And so that was the kind of trick about rendering New York in a specific way.
I couldn't figure out what happened to Joanna at the end.
Well, there's a line which addressed that like Johanna, Thomas's character he's walking with Ethan. He's like, "So are you with Johanna? Or have you seen Johanna? No. Are you lying to me? Yes." So the implication is that they still have something going on. And the idea behind that was, we had a long conversation. We developed that character with Kate quite a bit. And Kate was like, anytime there's a sexually active woman and it doesn't work out for her, or she has a shadow, because she's like, they are exiled. Like, they're sent off to the camps with syphilis. Like, and she's like, I don't. She, in a way, she's she's sort of a catalyst for honesty, and she felt really important. I like the idea of it. Like, there should be, maybe now that the truth is out, there's some possibility for them. I mean, it's a complicated world with where complicated relationships happen, and would he? I mean, it was an interesting. It was an interesting nuance that I really like. So the truth is, I mean, I think that they maybe they had a cup of coffee, 6 months later, and they couldn't keep their hands off of each other. I think the other thing that's interesting about the relationship between Ethan and Johanna, this is all stuff that we talked about that doesn't necessarily present itself in the film, but she knows that Thomas is not his biological son. In order for her to understand that, it would mean that he would have to have confessed that to her, which would imply a level of intimacy in the relationship that's kind of great and really impressive. And I find that kind of profound. And whether or not you can surrender that because of what happened, I mean, it's gross, it's terrifying, it's icky, but it's also shit like that happens all the time. All right, thank you. Thanks, guys. Yeah. If you liked it, tell your friends. If you didn't like it, tell your pets or your therapist.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.